Apologies for my late arrival. I got caught in a bottleneck. I am indeed late. The late Master Blender. You see before you one of the originators of the noble art of Scotch whisky blending. The original Mr. Nose. My nostrils have been lowered over the great and the good. A distinguished noser such as myself is absolutely essential in the blending of Scotch whiskies.
Farmhouse in Ardchatton, Argyllshire, George Orr, an enterprising Highlander, makes whisky in a simple domestic still, using the same method as the monks who had the good sense to introduce the art of distilling to Scotland from the Middle East centuries before. He uses the natural ingredients available to him, local barley and fresh water. George pays his rent with whisky and supplies other local farmers and neighbours, which makes him a very popular figure. The still is the warm centre of the family's home, which they share with their dogs, chickens and cattle. As production grew, so distilling became increasingly attractive to the important landowners. In those days, differences in the Highlands were usually settled by force. Here at Farintosh, a distillery was set ablaze by Jacobite sympathisers of the Catholic James II, because the owner, Duncan Forbes, had supported the restoration of the Protestant monarchy of 1688. Later, by way of recompense, the Scottish Parliament gave him the privilege of making whisky from any of the grain grown on his own estate without paying tax. Forbes and his family had the last laugh. They were quick to take advantage of the privilege. They began to buy up more and more agricultural land, and as they paid no duty, were able to produce their Farintosh whisky at a quality and price which couldn't be matched by their rivals. Just 75 years later, in 1760, John Forbes, Duncan's grandson, was too busy counting the profits from his 3 distilleries to notice the bitterness this was causing. The other distillers, upset by the unfair competition, protested to Parliament, and in 1784 the Farintosh concession, which had lasted for 100 years, was finally abolished. The business collapsed. Robert Burns, Scotland's national bard, who was known to enjoy a dram, composed a rhyme lament.
Goes sadly lost, Scotland running coast to coast. With fruits and hocking bush we kill us all, for loyal forces come to the coast, and his pain no more.
Although his stay was brief, the celebrations in the King's honour were spectacular. Parades and processions, the streets full of waving flags. The visit rekindled an interest in Scotland and its traditions, and the wearing of Highland dress was revived. Sir Walter Scott, whose romantic tales of life in the border country were very popular, organised the festivities. He certainly had some good stories to tell the King. The whisky flowed freely. The King's obvious appreciation gave it the royal seal of approval. More and more people began to enjoy Scotland's national drink. Early in the 19th century, changes were made in the law laying down new rules for the working of licensed distilleries and reducing excise duties. This encouraged a great revival of the legal trade, and within a few years the illicit stills had all gone. Then the United States imposed prohibition. The speakeasy took over from the club, and the bootleggers took over from the smugglers of old. Prohibition ended in 1933, leading to a new boom. But the good times didn't last long. A few years later, the world was at war again.